Voy a dar las instrucciones tanto en inglés como en español. Buenas tardes a todos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. El día de hoy tendremos una presentación por parte del doctor Benoit de aproximadamente 40 minutos, seguida de una sesión de preguntas y respuestas de aproximadamente 20 minutos. Durante la intervención del doctor Benoit los invitamos a mandar sus preguntas y comentarios en el chat. Posteriormente, si ustedes desean, también será posible hacer sus preguntas directamente. Nada más es necesario que levanten su mano. Y bueno, eso sería todo por el momento. Y good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are going to have a presentation by Dr. Benoit that will last approximately 40 minutes. After that, we are going to have the Q&A that will last approximately 20 minutes. If it is your wish to ask the question directly, it is also possible. You just need to raise your hand. And also during the presentation, if you prefer, you can also send your comments or questions in the chat. And well, without further ado, Dr. Benoit, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes. I'm very honored to be invited to talk to you today. And I have the utmost respect for Ulysses. I think he's a fine scholar. He studied with me for a while and we wrote an article together. And so I'm very happy to give a talk today. I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, this talk is about the rise and fall of mass communication, which is a book I wrote with Andrew Billings, and I'm very excited to say that I did the cover art for our book. And on the right is the mascot for the University of Alabama Birmingham's Blaze. I want to begin by offering a sort of a gift to everyone. There are two rules for success. And rule number one is never tell all you know. Thank you. You didn't think I was going to violate rule one myself. Mass communication is very important. I define mass communication as a situation in which one message reaches many people in the audience. By this definition, you might be surprised to hear we don't consider the telephone to be mass communication because most phone calls are one-to-one. One form of annoying mass communication that is used, the telephone or robocalls to try to sell you stuff you don't want. It's important to realize that the larger the audience, the greater the potential influence of a message. This is why mass communication is so important. Your messages, any message, can reach and inform and potentially persuade many people. And this is true regardless of context. It's true for sales or advertising. It's true in politics. It's true in entertainment. It's true in sports, and it's true in other contexts. The rise and fall, the rise of mass communication was facilitated by two factors. The first one is population growth. Population growth increased the potential audience size and accordingly the potential influence. In 70,000 BC, I learned the world population was between 1 and 10,000 people. Today, in the 1800s, it was about 1 billion. And by 2020, the world population is 8 billion. So the potential influence from mass communication has increased a lot. The US population increases every census. The United States Constitution mandates that every 10 years, we find out how many people there are and other information about them. And every census that the US has ever conducted had more people. There's a country called Mexico where I discovered the population increased from 39 million in 1961 to 127 million in 2021. So there's a huge audience in this country as well. The other element that contributes to the rise of mass communication is technological advances. The first earliest, the development of paper or papyrus, enabled a message to reach many people. Still, it could often take weeks to make one copy of a book. Gutenberg's printing press and his invention of movable type enabled many copies of a book, and it revolutionized society. Newspapers are another source of information for mass communication. In the American colonies, newspapers were begun in 1690, and I didn't realize this until I started researching it. Newspapers originally were formed by political parties to get the message out, but over time, more and more independent newspapers were created. By 1970, almost 80% of adults in the US read a paper every day. Radio first, and then television provided new ways for those of us who want to communicate to reach mass audiences. In 1917, the first music 1921. NBC and CBS began broadcasting television news in the 1940s. The apex of mass communication, in my view, along with Andy Billings, came in the 1970s. Viewers had few choices at the time. NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS, and possibly an independent television station. There was no social media. There was no internet. There was no Fox News, no CNN, just these 4 stations and maybe a 5th. NBC, CBS, and ABC sought to reach the very same audience, and therefore they offered very similar content. Nearly identical stories in an evening, and sometimes even the same video footage was used. With almost no other options, nearly everyone saw the same information and opinions. William and Delicarpini said, "The first time in history, people unknown to each other who met knew what each other had almost certainly heard or seen the night before. The big game, the favorite comedy show, Winston Churchill's speech, the contents of the news bulletin." So this was the height of mass media, in our opinion. But those things which rise will also fall. Past political messages attracted huge audiences. In 1960, the first debate between Nixon and Kennedy attracted 37% of the population. In 1974, President Nixon's resignation speech attracted 60% of the American population. US population continued to grow, but audiences shrank, both when counted by size and by percentage of population. The first Biden-Trump debate in 2020 attracted only 22% of the population. Obviously, a large drop from 37% of the Nixon-Kennedy debate. Brett Kavanaugh testified before the Senate before he was confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. Only 6% of the US population tuned in. Increased choice fragments audiences. In 1960, again, if your television was turned on, you watched the Nixon-Kennedy debates, and television was a fairly recent invention, so lots of people watched it. There was no VCR to watch, no DVDs, no satellite TV, no cable TV, no internet, and no social media. So if your and you didn't have a laptop and you didn't have a tablet. So if your television was turned on, you watched the Nixon-Kennedy debate. As technology progressed with the invention of VHS, DVDs, the internet, social media, more choices in viewing increased, and then the choices in viewing exploded. The myriad of choices available began to see people living in what some people have called virtual silos, consuming different content and developing different beliefs, values, and audiences. Andy and I characterize this as balkanizing audience. Balkanization is a term that was first applied to new countries that emerged in the Balkan Peninsula, often hostile to one another, just as some news or social media are hostile to each other today. I've tried to contrast with network viewers. In 2015, 2016, CBS had 2.9% viewers, NBC 2.4. All of these news networks reached 9.5% of the US population. For those good at subtraction, that means over 90% use other media to obtain their information and opinions. Another factor in the fall of mass communication is in America, the fairness doctrine was abolished. The Federal Communications Commission created the fairness doctrine in 1949. This rule required broadcast stations present contrasting views on controversial issues, increasing the variety of information and opinions available to viewers. But in 1987, the FCC repealed the fairness doctrine. The consequences were quickly seen as Rush Limbaugh's radio program was syndicated in 1988. Fox News was established in 1996. It does not matter whether you prefer CNN, Fox, MSNBC, One America News, both the content and the opinions on these networks differ dramatically, and that alters the information and opinions available to people who use these information sources. I played around with my computer, and I tried to sort of visualize what happened in the mass media. Initially, there were 4 major news stations, and both the information that they contained and the audiences that they reached were about the same. But in the current media effort, we have many more broadcast news stations, many more internet blogs, many more internet sources, Twitter, and of course, Twitter and Facebook are not unified. I think there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of different sources on Twitter, and they contain different information for the people who follow those Twitter feeds. So balkanization has really divided the mass audience, and people obtain different information and opinions. Didn't you like that diagram? I did. To document the fact that different information is available on different sources, which I don't think will be a controversial claim, but still. A 2012 study of commentary or opinion versus fact found MSNBC had only 15% facts, the rest commentary information. Fox had 45% fact, the rest comment and information. And CNN had 54% fact, and the rest comments and information. So just looking at the basic distinction of whether you're presenting information or opinions. And of course, there are different pieces of information and different opinions lumped together here. There's quite a difference in these 3 networks. Someone content analyzed the words that were scrolled on screen, which are called cryons, in 2018 on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC. The Russia investigation, which is whether Trump was connected to Russia, was discussed more than any other topic, was discussed more than any other network on MSNBC. Hillary Clinton and NFL protests against racism were discussed the most on Fox. I've done a lot of studies on issue ownership, which is a theory developed by John Petrosik, where he argues that Republicans and Democrats emphasize different topics. Tweets from Democrats and Republicans, this is not my study, on COVID-19 from January through March of 2020. Democrats tweeted earlier and more often about COVID than Republicans. Democratic COVID tweets more often discussed health, leave, and testing. Republican House and Senate tweets most often discussed national unity, China, and businesses. So when they talked about COVID, Republicans and Democrats in their tweets focused on different issues. And obviously that altered what information was available to their followers. I mentioned before Petrosik's issue ownership theory. Republicans and Democrats stress different topics in TV spots, debates, and speeches. Republicans usually stress national defense, taxes, foreign policy, and government spending. In contrast, Democrats usually stress education, healthcare, Social Security, and the environment. This is true even in general election debates when candidates are asked to answer the same questions. Republicans and Democrats provide different information to viewers. Of course, when they discuss the same topic, they often have different content. Is this an inheritance tax, which is what the Democrats talk about, or is it a death tax, which is how the Republicans characterize it? Are you pro-choice, which is what the Democrats say when they talk about abortion, or are you pro-life when the Republicans talk about abortion? I think a striking example of this was we had a hearing in the US that perhaps you've heard about, the January 6th committee, which investigated the riot at the US Capitol, not one of the best days in American history. Fox News primetime shows went commercial free for more than 2.5 hours, while they did not air the January 6th committee hearings. The hearing happened to begin around 8 p.m., coinciding with the start of Tucker Carlson's show, which did not air any commercials in this show. Carlson used the entire program to downplay the storming of the Capitol and entertain conspiracy theories about that day. It seems obvious that Fox News wanted to keep viewers from finding out about the hearings from other sources. I mean, they gave up the revenue from commercials. The Department of Justice unsealed a warrant for classified documents at Mar-a-Lago on August 12th. I want to say I try to be equal-handed politically. Classified documents have been discovered at President Joe Biden's residence. He's a Democrat, of course. But the day after the searches for Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence on right-wing web pages, the opening screens from two services, Fox News and National Review, covered the documents, the warrant as straight news. The opening screens from Red State and Daily Wire did not cover the story at all. Yeah, sure, warrants to search the former president's house, that's not news at all. The opening screens from Breitbart, The Federalist, and Town Hall cover the story, but what they said was the DOJ was wrong for issuing this warrant. Only 2 of 10 conservative websites mentioned the January 6th hearing in their top 5 news stories. The exceptions were not straight news coverage. One of the exceptions was Representative Tenney likens the 1/6 panel's probe to a Soviet-style trial. Another headline said, committee asks Justice Department to neutralize political opponents with criminal prosecution, hardly even-handed treatment of the topic. And I'm skipping away from the January 6th committee hearing to talk about network mentions of 2022 Senate candidate. Fox discussed 112 Democrats and 124 Republicans. CNN and MSNBC together discussed 76 Democrats and 103 Republicans. So depending upon what networks you watch or what Twitter feeds you follow, you will get different information. You can't see this, but I'm shaking my hand when I do. You get different information. Consequences. Abramowitz and Webster did a study in 2016 where they found that a growing proportion of Americans dislike the opposing party more than they like their own political party. I find that very interesting. In the US, we have what we call straight ticket voting, where you cast election votes for candidates from a single political party. And this contrasts with split ticket voting, where you cast at least one vote for a Democrat and a Republican. Straight ticket voting rose as split ticket voting dropped in recent years. In October of 2020, just 3% of Democrats, but 95% of Republicans approved of the job President Trump had done. Clearly, the information you have, which varies according to what information sources you use, influences your opinions dramatically. In 2021, the US had the fewest states ever, 6 out of 50, to have senators from both parties. Every state in the US has 2 senators, two senators. And in all but 6 cases, they're either both Democrats or both Republicans. In 2022, only 1 state voted for a senator who was not from the party that the state voted for president in 2020. So the votes for president in 2020 align with the votes for senator in 2022 in only 1 state, in all but 1 state. I'm very curious about media balkanization in multi-party countries. We do have more than 2 parties in the United States, but only 2 of them are really important, get lots of votes, and have a reasonable chance of electing senators and presidents and representatives. But Wikipedia lists examples of 18 multi-party countries. I'm not going to read their names. I have heard that another multi-party country is Mexico. And is that right? Am I not if I'm right? Thank you. I would very much like to know if there are different news media that tend to cater to different parties in Mexico and other countries. I would expect that it does, but I don't know that for sure. So my concluding thoughts today, and I see I'm about 10 minutes early, and I really apologize for that. When different groups of people use different media sources, which offer different information and opinions, audiences become fragmented. Millions live in virtual information silos. Some people do consume conflicting information, but many people, and I speculate it's probably most people, rely on media that reinforce existing attitudes and sharpen the differences between them and other audiences in different virtual information silos. Balkanized audiences have different beliefs, different values, and different attitudes. As time goes on and audiences continue to fragment, audiences will have less and less in common, especially when contrasted with the glory days of what I consider to be true mass communication. I think Ulysses may have shared with you that Andy and I are editing a special issue of the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media. I invite you to write about the rise and fall, or the rise or the fall of mass communication, and submit a manuscript to this journal. I cannot guarantee publication or even give preference, but I strongly invite you to submit your research to our special issue. I guess that's that. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for that wonderful and very insightful presentation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Now we will have the Q&A. Once again, I invite everyone to, we'll just give a couple seconds for like the questions to start arriving, because we can either, as I said, I can either read them or like send them to you, or people can ask directly, but we'll just give it a couple of seconds until they do. Bueno, en este momento vamos a empezar el Q&A. Los invito a mandar directamente sus preguntas o a levantar la mano en su defecto en caso de que necesiten apoyo con la traducción, ya sea directamente o simplemente enviar su pregunta en español y yo se la traduzco al profesor, también es posible. Entonces, esperamos sus preguntas. So, first question, Bill, would be, this is from Martina Echeverria. What's the difference between the proposal, your proposal, and that of post-broadcast democracy by Marcus Pryor, centered on the role of entertainment? I don't know if you're familiar with the reference. I personally am not, but I'm just asking in case we need further explanation of this particular theory.
I've read Marcus Pryor's book and I was very, very impressed with it. I used it as a source when I worked on my chapters for the book on the rise and fall of mass communication. I don't remember having any disagreements with Professor Pryor. I think we emphasized some different information than he did, but I think our basic thrust is quite similar. As I said, I have a great deal of respect for Professor Pryor and his book, Post-Broadcast Democracy.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Second question from Gerardo Albarrán would be, which would be the major consequences that you see in the fragmentation of the audiences?
As I'm a great believer in Fishbein and Eigen's theory of attitudes, where they say each attitude consists of a belief, such as Steve is a Republican, and a value, such as Republicans are good or Republicans are bad. And when you're exposed to different information sources, you obtain different information, different beliefs, and different opinions or different values. So people who have different information and opinions, different beliefs and values, have to develop different attitudes. It's not a matter of choice. And when you have different attitudes, that influences your behavior. It influences voting behavior. It influences contributions to candidates. It influences discussions that you have with other voters. So to me, the consequences are very significant when you have different information sources and different values.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Eva Maria Suarez, and she's asking, can we talk about mass communication in the context of digital media? And if we cannot, how could we name the current theory?
Well, we talk about traditional forms of mass communication, such as newspapers and radio and television, but we also talk about social media, such as Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, other forms of media. And I think that as information sources proliferate, including hundreds of thousands of different Twitter feeds, different Facebook pages, then human beings have a limited information capacity. You can't pay attention to every Twitter feed or every Facebook page. As long as you tend to follow certain information sources, whether it's Fox News or Twitter or CNN, you will get different information, and that will fundamentally influence your attitudes. So I think this theory applies to both traditional media and new electronic media and social media.
Thank you. Next question we have from Jose Luis Alvarez. I would like to know your thoughts on the idea that some people don't care about the truth value of communication as much as they care for emotional dimension of beliefs within a community. How can information triumph emotion in a context of great political polarization?
I don't know that information or truth can triumph. I wish it could and would, but as I shared earlier, most Democrats dislike Republicans more than they like other Democrats, and the same is true for Republicans. Most Republicans dislike Democrats more than they like their own party Republicans. And a lot of American politicians, should I name some? Marjorie Taylor Greene, lash out at other people, and they're trying to in my opinion, I'm not a mind reader. In my opinion, they're trying to pander to their base, who already has a set of beliefs and values, and they're trying to excite their base. Their base may believe, for example, that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, but they like to hear people say the Democrats stole the election, regardless of whether they believe that's true or not. And again, I don't want to say no Republican has true beliefs. Obviously, many of them do believe things that are true. But the media fragmented as a result of technological increases, and people are allowed to choose what media they consume. And I can't make them see the facts as I see them. I can try to make that information available to them, but I can't force them to read it or watch it or listen to it. So I don't know if you're familiar with the metaphor of Humpty Dumpty. Mass media fell off a wall and it broke into thousands of pieces, and I don't think anyone can put it back together again. I think we need to learn to live with the consequences of media balkanization, because I don't think it's ever going away, sadly.
It's a complex issue. Next, we have Dr. Ulises' question, a very interesting one. Are fake news more or less common within fragmented audiences?
I think that fake news, I haven't done a study about this, so I'm just expressing my opinion. I'm not stating anything I consider to be a fact. I think that fragmented audiences sometimes do receive the facts, but I think I think that fake news is more likely to occur on fragmented audiences. I don't know that there are any audiences that aren't fragmented in some way. And I think fake news is a horrible phrase. I think the truth matters, but I don't think everyone agrees with me. And as I said before, I don't see any way to force people to see the truth. If I could, I'm not sure I would enact any way to force them to see the truth. I think freedom of choice is important, even if you do access and believe untruthful things.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Next question would be, with respect to traditional media, I'm sorry. What should the media do in the face of polarizing messages and disinformation that are sent from the realm of political power in order to delegitimize the media themselves?
I think that's an excellent question, and I don't have a good answer for it. I think that people who perceive the coverage of them to be unfair are going to lash out at the media. People don't like to admit their shortcomings and their mistakes. And I talk a lot about that when I write about image repair. So they lash out at the news media that criticizes them. And you can try to provide fact checks, but if a lot of people don't access the information sources that have fact checks, and if some people they just refuse to, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to step on anyone's toes. There's lots of evidence, in my opinion, that the 2020 election was not stolen and it was not rigged. But I think there are some people who, no matter what evidence you show them, are convinced that it was. In fact, I just read a story about how Arizona commissioned a report about election fraud, and the report came back, there was no significant fraud, nothing that would have changed the election. And they just buried the report. They never announced it. So that's information to dispute labels of false news that just never, until recently, a couple of years later, was never available to the public.
Yes, it is indeed a complex situation. And the last question would be, can we consider disinformation another consequence deriving from polarization? And what measures should we take upon this so we can avoid a bias in the narrative?
I do think fragmentation makes misinformation inevitable, and I think that's very sad. And I'm not a reformer, I'm a researcher. I think the only thing that occurs to me that could help is a grassroots effort that encourages people to inform themselves and seek out information. And I think higher education, such as your university and mine, helps educate people and makes it more likely that many of our graduates do seek the truth and are able to evaluate information. So, and there's no quick fix. I don't know if it'll ever be solved. I don't know that it'll ever be completely solved, but I think educating people is one of the best defenses we have. And for those of you who are educators or are in education, I applaud you for the work you're doing. I mean, you may not be trying to combat balkanization and misinformation, but I think you are. And I thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer each and every question. So specifically, this was our last question, and I now give the floor to Ulises. And thank you so much, Professor, for this wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor. Okay. Unfortunately, time is never enough compared with all the things we can learn and think about. Before concluding this event, I just want to express my deepest gratitude to Professor Benoit for all his guidance during my doctoral research stay at Ohio University.